The crisis in Venezuela has evolved into one of the most complex geopolitical and economic crises of the modern era. What began as a domestic political and economic collapse has grown into an international issue affecting global energy markets, diplomatic alliances, migration patterns, and strategic competition among major world powers. Over the past decade, Venezuela has experienced severe economic decline, political instability, hyperinflation, and a dramatic collapse of its oil industry, once the backbone of the country's economy. However, the effects of Venezuela's crisis extend far beyond Latin America. The country's enormous oil reserves, strategic partnerships with countries such as Iran, Russia, and China, and its tense relationship with the United States have turned it into a major geopolitical battleground. Developments in Venezuela influence energy prices, security strategies, and diplomatic relations across the Middle East and the United States. Understanding Venezuela's crisis requires examining its political history, the collapse of its oil sector, the role of international sanctions, and the broader global competition for energy resources. As the situation evolves, Venezuela remains a key example of how domestic instability in one country can reshape global political and economic dynamics. Today we will talk about Venezuela's crisis and its impact on the Middle East and US. So before we start, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. The origins of Venezuela's crisis. Political and economic transformation. The roots of Venezuela's modern crisis can be traced back to the presidency of Hugo Chavez, who came to power in 1999. Chavez launched a political movement known as the Bolivarian Revolution, which aimed to redistribute wealth, reduce poverty, and challenge U.S. influence in Latin America. A key component of Chavez's policy was the nationalization of industries, particularly the oil sector. Venezuela's state oil company, Petróleos de Venezuela, PDVSA, became the central pillar of the national economy. While high oil prices during the early 2000s allowed the government to fund social programs, structural economic problems began to appear. Heavy reliance on oil revenues, declining investment in infrastructure, and weak economic diversification gradually undermined the country's stability. When oil prices fell globally in the mid-2000s, Venezuela's economy entered a severe crisis. The collapse of Venezuela's oil industry. From energy giant to economic collapse. Venezuela holds the largest proven oil reserves in the world, estimated at around 303 billion barrels. Despite these enormous reserves, the country's oil production collapsed dramatically over the past decade due to mismanagement, underinvestment, and international sanctions. In 2013, Venezuela produced roughly 2.5 million barrels of oil per day, but production steadily declined, and by the mid-2020s had fallen to around 1 million barrels per day. Several factors contributed to this decline. Aging oil infrastructure, loss of skilled workers, corruption and inefficiency in PDVSA, lack of foreign investment, international sanctions. This collapse devastated Venezuela's economy because oil exports historically accounted for the majority of the country's national revenue. U.S. sanctions and political pressure. Washington's strategy toward Venezuela. The United States has played a central role in Venezuela's crisis through sanctions and diplomatic pressure. Washington imposed economic sanctions targeting Venezuelan officials, financial institutions, and especially the oil sector. The goal of these sanctions has been to pressure the government of Nicolas Maduro to restore democratic institutions and address corruption and human rights concerns. Sanctions have targeted oil exports, international banking access, financial transactions, business partnerships with PDVSA. While supporters argue sanctions are necessary to pressure Venezuela's leadership, critics claim they have worsened the country's humanitarian crisis by limiting access to foreign currency and imports. Venezuela and the Middle East connection. Strategic partnership with Iran. One of the most significant international dimensions of Venezuela's crisis is its relationship with Iran. Both countries face heavy U.S. sanctions and share similar economic challenges as major oil producers. This has led them to cooperate closely in several areas. Iran has provided Venezuela with oil refinery parts, technical assistance, fuel shipments, industrial equipment. From 2021 onward, Iran reportedly supplied millions of spare parts to help repair Venezuelan refineries and boost oil production. This partnership allows both countries to bypass some sanctions and maintain economic activity despite international pressure. Energy politics and global oil markets. Why Venezuela matters for global energy. Because Venezuela holds such vast oil reserves, developments in the country have a direct impact on global energy markets. Energy analysts often monitor Venezuela closely because any increase or decrease in its oil production can influence global supply. For example, geopolitical shifts in Venezuela have contributed to volatility in global oil markets, especially when combined with tensions in major Middle Eastern producers. At times when Middle Eastern oil supply is disrupted, such as conflicts involving Iran, Venezuela becomes even more strategically important as an alternative supplier. Recent global tensions involving oil production and shipping disruptions in the Middle East have already caused prices to surge above $100 per barrel, highlighting how interconnected these regions are. U.S. strategic interests in Venezuelan oil. Energy security and geopolitics. For the United States, Venezuela's oil resources represent both a challenge and an opportunity. Many U.S. refineries are designed to process heavy crude oil, the type produced in large quantities in Venezuela. Because of this, American energy infrastructure historically depended heavily on Venezuelan oil imports. When sanctions limited these imports, U.S. refineries were forced to find alternative suppliers. This shift has had ripple effects across global energy markets, pushing companies to seek crude oil from other regions including Canada, Mexico, Middle Eastern producers, West African exporters. These changes illustrate how Venezuela's crisis can influence energy strategies far beyond Latin America. Migration and humanitarian consequences. The Venezuelan refugee crisis. Another major dimension of Venezuela's crisis is mass migration. Millions of Venezuelans have left the country in search of economic stability and safety. Many migrants have traveled to neighboring countries such as Colombia, Brazil, Peru, Ecuador. Others have attempted to reach the United States. This migration crisis has placed pressure on governments throughout the Americas and has become an important political issue in U.S. domestic debates about immigration policy. Great power competition. China and Russia's role. The Venezuelan crisis has also become part of a broader geopolitical competition involving major global powers. Both China and Russia have supported Venezuela through loans, investment, and diplomatic backing. China has invested heavily in Venezuelan infrastructure and energy projects, while Russia has provided financial assistance and security cooperation. These partnerships have complicated U.S. efforts to isolate Venezuela diplomatically and economically. Possible future scenarios. What comes next for Venezuela? The future of Venezuela remains uncertain, but several possible scenarios could shape the country's trajectory. Political transition and democratic reforms. Continued economic stagnation. Increased foreign investment in the oil sector. Expanded geopolitical competition between global powers. If Venezuela's oil industry were successfully rebuilt, the country could once again become one of the world's most important energy producers. Such a development would reshape global energy markets and alter strategic calculations in both Washington and the Middle East. If you liked this video and would like to see more like it, please give it the thumbs up. Leave a comment and click the button to subscribe.